The Legend of Zelda is one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world, with numerous titles that are all loosely connected through an expansive timeline. Yet when Nintendo released Breath of the Wild, players were confused to where it went. Nintendo has only said that it went at the end of the timeline, despite the timeline having 3 branches by that point, while the game contained unique elements from each branch. This led to 2 theories. Either the branches merged together before the events of Breath of the Wild, or Nintendo lied about the game being connected and that it exists on its own. But what if I told you both ideas were wrong? That Breath of the Wild and its direct sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, are on only one of the 3 branches. That's what I intend to prove today here on Story Mode. To start, we need to define what the timeline is, how it operates, and why the 2 prevalent theories don't work. The Zelda timeline consists of several different eras, with each era usually representing a new hero and princess with titles related to their primary adventure. While some eras can have multiple games, they typically use the same hero and princess as the previous game in the era. While we'll be focusing primarily on individual games, knowing the setup will matter going forward. The timeline begins with a chain of 4 games: Skyward Sword, The Minish Cap, 4 Swords, and Ocarina of Time, with the last making things messier than my bedroom. Ocarina of Time is the story of the hero of time, out to stop the King of Evil from taking over Hyrule. While he starts his journey as a child, he ends up being sealed away for 7 years, after which he travels back and forth between the 2 points in time. After the King of Evil is sealed away at the end of the game, the hero returns to his childhood and 2 branches are formed. The child timeline, where the hero changes events to prevent what's to come, and the adult timeline, where things remain as they were. Then in 2011, Nintendo caught fans off guard when they revealed the official timeline, showing that a 3rd branch was formed from the idea of the hero of time losing to the King of Evil in the final battle, the Downfall timeline. This is where Breath of the Wild comes in. Up to this point, Zelda games rarely made direct references to other games, but Breath of the Wild was filled with them, including some to the hero of time. This allowed fans to know the game occurred after the timeline split. However, they couldn't determine which branch it belonged to, as it had references to all 3 timelines, including things unique to specific branches. We are going to focus on 3 of these unique elements: the Zora, the Rito, and the Lynels. The Zora are an aquatic race with fish-like traits, with their fates changing depending on the timeline. In the child timeline, they're largely unchanged, only adding a unique red variant to the mix. In the Downfall timeline, the Zora split into 2 groups: the River Zora, who mutate into green, monster-like creatures, and the Ocean Zora, who only appear in a single title in the branch. As for their fate in the adult timeline, this brings us to our second group, the Rito. While Ocarina of Time saw the King of Evil be sealed away, he eventually broke free. When no hero emerged to stop him, the people turned to their gods, who went, "Hey, we should do something." After instructing groups of people to move to the mountaintops, they flooded Hyrule, creating an ocean that sealed Hyrule and the King of Evil underneath it. However, this new sea that the gods knowed onto Hyrule was ethereal water from the heavens, which the Zora couldn't survive in. This ultimately led to them evolving to the bird-like Rito, where they would become unique to the adult timeline. Lastly, we have the Lynels. Lynels are powerful lion centaur monsters who, you see, okay, listen, anything I can say about them doesn't matter. The only thing that does is that they're only in the Downfall timeline. Except when it comes to Breath of the Wild, where all 3 races appear. To allow them all to exist in one place, fans came up with the merged timeline idea. There's just one problem. How did the timelines merge? The answer is an obvious one for Zelda fans: the Triforce. Remember those gods who flooded Hyrule? These are the golden goddesses who forged the worlds from chaos before leaving. On their departure, they left 3 golden triangles that combined into a singular triangle that could grant the wish of any who touch it: the Triforce. Some of the things the Triforce is used for include slaying godlike beings, reviving the dead, and even creating a copy of itself in another dimension. However, someone would need to wish for the Triforce to merge the timelines, an impossible wish if nobody knows about them. And the people of Hyrule are terrible at keeping track of things. Take the Minish Cap, which opens with a legend of 1,000 years before, when monsters threatened the world and the Picori came down from the sky, giving Hylians a sword that is used to defeat the monsters. It turns out they're not called the Picori, but rather the Minish, with the name being lost and replaced purely because the sword they gave was called the Picori Blade. Meanwhile, the timeline is well over 10,000 years long and is likely over 100,000. There's no way they'd be able to figure out that multiple timelines exist. The only solution to explain how someone made the wish comes from a now retired YouTuber known as, Mark Park? Or was it Patterplier? Whatever it is, their solution was that the multiple timelines were learned about during the Zelda spin-off game called Hyrule Warriors, where characters from across the Zelda timeline joined together to save a future era in the child timeline. However, Nintendo has said that this specific game is not canon, so it can't be used as an explanation. That said, the merged timeline idea is inherently broken thanks to a lore change made in Breath of the Wild. Throughout the game, players can find 7 volumes of Rumor Mill, a publication that covers various stories and legends, with players being able to directly confirm all but one of them. The odd one out, Volume 2, reads like this. Greetings from Tracy, your source for the best gossip and news. Have you been hearing any good stories on your travels? I've got a great one for you today. The sword that seals the darkness. The only one who can wield this sword carries the blood of the hero in their veins. That's what they say about this special blade. Rumor has it the blade has been hidden away in a forest somewhere. I have to admit that this rumor really has me interested, but sometimes you have to face reality. My reality is, there isn't any hero in my bloodline, so this sword would just be a big paperweight to me. The sword that seals the darkness refers to the Master Sword, a powerful magic sword found in most Zelda titles. What's significant about the Master Sword is that the sword is capable of choosing who can wield it. The hero of A Link to the Past can't pull the Master Sword unless he's collected the 3 sacred medallions, while in Ocarina of Time, it's the Master Sword that seals the hero of time away, deciding he's too young to use it. But Breath of the Wild's idea of the sword being bound by bloodline, an idea affirmed as literal thanks to Tracy's closing line, would contradict this. Now, bloodlines have come up before in the franchise. In A Link to the Past, one of the 7 maidens that the hero rescues while in the Dark World says this. If a person who has an evil heart gets the Triforce, a hero is destined to appear, and he alone must face the person who began the Great Cataclysm. Only a person of the Knights of Hyrule who protected the royalty of Hylia can become the hero. You are of their bloodline, aren't you? Yet this is only about the hero who would rise up and is defined in a way that allows for multiple candidates. On top of that, A Link to the Past is the first story of the Downfall timeline, a branch that's created when the hero of time is slain and wouldn't get the chance to have a family. We also have no evidence of an extended family to bridge the gap, meaning there's no way for these 2 heroes to be related by blood, and thus the Downfall timeline doesn't even work with the lore of Breath of the Wild. The only other mention of bloodline comes from Twilight Princess, brought up by the hero's spirit. This armored skeleton is the hero of time that lived on in the child timeline, confirmed thanks to the book Hyrule Historia. We'll cover more about that book later. The story goes that when the hero of time passed away, he regretted not passing on his knowledge and thus hasn't been able to move on, something he's correcting by teaching the hero of Twilight. After instructing the hero on a few skills, the spirit says that the remaining skills are to remain within their bloodline, suggesting the hero of time did have a family. The problem here is that if he had his own family, he would have taught his kids and never had these lingering regrets. This suggests he never had children of his own, and like before, we'd have no proof of an extended family. Now, the child timeline doesn't work with Breath of the Wild. As for the adult timeline, it's the same thing. In Wind Waker, the hero of winds is confirmed to have no connections whatsoever to the hero of time, yet can still use the Master Sword. This also verifies that the hero of time had no extended family. Now none of the timelines work, all while Nintendo is doubling down on this lore change in Breath of the Wild's direct sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. If the player completes all 152 shrines, they're directed to go to the Temple of Time on the Great Sky Island. There they can find the Ancient Heroes aspect, an item described as containing the spirit of a hero who once saved Hyrule. When worn, Link takes on the appearance of a male with green skin, red hair, and a snout and tail, who fans theorize is a Hylian Zonai hybrid. This is the Ancient Hero, a past hero learned about in Breath of the Wild through a mural depicting the rise of Calamity Ganon some 10,000 years before the game's events. We know this is the Ancient Hero as is confirmed by Purah, a member of a race called the Sheikah, who are the ones who own the mural. If players speak to Purah while wearing the Ancient Hero's aspect, she'll tell Link that he looks good dressed as the Ancient Hero. She'll also say she almost didn't recognize Link, implying the two share enough visual similarities that allow Purah to know who she was talking to. The only way that would be possible is if Link was a descendant of the ancient hero. This begs the question of how the old games are supposed to connect, leading us into the other prevalent idea that Breath of the Wild is a separate universe. During Nintendo Live in August of 2024, Nintendo revealed an updated version of the timeline that seemed to imply that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were separate from the rest of the timeline. However, this is just an interpretation error by fans. Rather than display the two games as an entirely separate line, Nintendo placed them at the end of the timeline just as they have always said. They then used the vertical line to indicate that they weren't saying which timeline it was connected to, which is consistent with what they've said thus far. There are also numerous references in Breath of the Wild to other stories in the timeline that makes it impossible to be separated. This brings me to my hypothesis. No, not theory, I won't tread on Mathiplier's territory. I believe that the timeline Nintendo has shared with us is not the true timeline of Hyrule. Instead, it's a timeline consisting only of the legends of Hyrule, which are based on the true history of Hyrule but contain numerous errors. This makes it that players are acting as historians, trying to uncover the truth and separate history from fairy tale. Hyrule's recurring periods of prosperity and decline have made it impossible to tell which legends are historical fact and which are mere fairy tales. This quote is from Creating a Champion, an official book from Nintendo that presents illustrations, concept art, and development notes from Breath of the Wild. Creating a Champion is also where Nintendo gave Breath of the Wild's timeline placement. While this quote can suggest that Nintendo won't be beholden to things before Breath of the Wild, I don't agree. Nintendo has always cared far more about the timeline than fans give them credit. Many think Nintendo never planned a timeline out and simply made it to appease fans, despite the fact that Nintendo has always stated where each game went on the timeline, whether through manuals, game boxes, or interviews found only in Japanese publications. Then in 2011, Nintendo released Hyrule Historia, a book that contained the first official version of the timeline, along with artwork, production notes, and the history of Hyrule of all canon games released by that point. Of the 15 Zelda titles that existed at the time, only one was moved, Four Swords Adventures. And all of this is before pointing out that in November of 2024, Nintendo revealed that Echoes of Wisdom, a game released only a few months prior, was located in the Downfall timeline between Triforce Heroes and the original Legend of Zelda. Why would they bother revealing this if they didn't care? This is why I think that the quote is Nintendo saying that all of the games on the timeline before Breath of the Wild are just legends and aren't historically accurate stories. The series is named The Legend of Zelda after all, and legends tend to get things wrong. Only games that take place after Breath of the Wild are historically accurate, which we can see if we look closely at Tears of the Kingdom story. The Kingdom of Hyrule is founded by the descendants of people who once lived in the sky. One day, the king of the Gerudo, a man with round ears, comes to Hyrule and swears fealty to its king. Zelda believes this man is dangerous, but the king of Hyrule ignores her warning. There's also a Sage of Light named Rauru. One day, the Gerudo man lures Zelda and another to him. He kills the other in front of Zelda and lays claim to a powerful relic, becoming the Demon King. He forms an army of monsters and attacks Hyrule, bent on conquering it. The King of Hyrule gathers the sages to stop the Demon King, stealing him away but at a high cost for Hyrule. This becomes known as the Imprisoning War. What I just described is the backstory of Tears of the Kingdom broken down to its most generic elements. However, fans of the franchise will know that this is also the story of Ocarina of Time if you follow its path into the Downfall timeline with an added note about Hyrule's founding at the start. Tears of the Kingdom is riddled with similarities to Ocarina of Time, with at least a dozen story details overlapping between them, most occurring in the present day of the game rather than its backstory. There are two interpretations of the same story, which lines up perfectly with our hypothesis. Jumping back, I brought up Rauru's name for a reason. As a lore-important character, he falls under a rule of the Zelda franchise that fans don't seem to notice. Only the names Zelda, Link, Ganondorf, and Impa are reused for lore-important characters. While Nintendo does reuse a lot of names such as Beetle, Malon, and Dampé, they're never for characters that matter to the story. These characters can be removed with no effect to what's going on. Whenever they do reuse a lore character name, it's explicitly the same character. Looking at you, Nico from Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks, even though Tetra and the Hero of Winds don't show up in that last one. This rule is something Nintendo seems to follow very closely, avoiding using identical names even when a character is supposed to call back to another. Take Gaepora, the father of the princess in Skyward Sword. His name is similar to Kaepora Gaebora, a giant owl first seen in Ocarina of Time. The owl is an avatar for Rauru in that game, so he can aid the young hero of time, but frustrates players when they try to speed through his dialogue and hit the button that makes him repeat it all because for some reason Nintendo made the choices opposite from the norm, but only for him, so you have to go through it all again and hope that this time you don't make the same mistake or you do it all again! I'm okay, I swear. Anyway. Gaepora's outfit is similar to Ocarina of Time's Rauru, while his face evokes some of Gaepora Gaebora. Yet his name isn't Rauru, Kaepora, or Gaebora. It's Gaepora, a fusion of Kaepora and Gaebora. This is how strict they follow the rule. So giving the founding king of Hyrule the name of Rauru is incredibly strange, more so when I remind you that both uses of the name come from stories that are very similar to one another. It reminds me of Sahasrahla, the sole potential exception to this rule. Sahasrahla is found in 2 games, A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds. In both games, Sahasrahla has the same appearance, the same role in both society and story, and the same power of telepathy, making him effectively the same character. On top of this, both games feature very similar stories and the layout of Hyrule is near identical between them. It's as if the 2 stories, and thus the 2 Sahasrahlas, are all the same. Is this a good time to bring up the new Zelda Notes app and its lore revelation that the land of Hyrule can change over time due to spirits? No, not enough time? Okay, I'll save that for now. Instead, let's look at another Ocarina of Time character mentioned in Tears of the Kingdom who, like Rauru, isn't the same between the 2 versions. Of course, I'm talking about the Jewel of the Zora, Princess Ruto. Throughout Zora's domain are 9 monuments telling various stories about the Zora. While these monuments existed in Breath of the Wild, including one that mentions Ruto, it's the updated monuments of Tears of the Kingdom that really matter. One of them, titled The Legend of Ruto, Our Great Ancestor, says this. It is written that long ago there was a strong-willed Zora princess who was as meandering as a winding river. The princess, who was dearly loved by her fellow Zora, was as noble as she was innocent. Her name was Ruto. This description of Ruto is pretty accurate to what's seen in Ocarina of Time. Ruto has a habit of being indirect with others, like when she tells the Hero of Time that the Zora's Sapphire, the item he travels to Zora's domain to obtain, is considered the Zora's engagement ring and that her mother instructed her to only give it to the man who she would marry before she just gives it to the hero. He doesn't realize he just agreed to marry her until he encounters her in the future and she points it out. The monument continues on, describing when someone tried to take over Hyrule and events surrounding that, with the final line standing out. Next, she swam against the river's current and climbed the mighty waterfall to challenge her foe. The details of this fight have fallen victim to the haze of time. Few details remain. We never saw Ruto fight in Ocarina of Time, nor was she implied to be capable of fighting. When the King of Evil attacked a domain there, he simply froze it over and trapped its people in ice, including Ruto. The only reason Ruto escapes the ice is thanks to the involvement of another. Ruto being described as a fighter contradicts what we know about her. Then there's the final line, where the writer admits that there's nothing else known about the fight. For the writer, these details are what they know as fact. Yet this is what we should see happening. The Zora knew Ruto as a fighter, but eventually this information is lost, giving us 2 versions, one set in history and the other in legend. Let's call these the historical and the legend timelines. So far, we found 2 things that support our hypothesis, but there's a saying that it takes 3 to make a pattern, and I'm a fan of making patterns. Luckily, it's not hard to do that with the help of our female protagonist and best girl, Zelda. Remember Skyward Sword, the first game in the timeline? It tells us that the Princess of the Skies is actually the mortal reincarnation of a goddess of light named Hylia, whom our glittering goddies charged with protecting the Triforce when they left. While the princess originally lived on an island in the sky, at the end of the game she chooses to live on the surface where she has her own family. Her descendants then formed the Kingdom of Hyrule, with women born into the royal family both being named Zelda in her honor and inheriting Hylia's power of light like a god-given power. Tears of the Kingdom upends this idea when Zelda travels back in time and meets her ancestor and the founding king of Hyrule, the Zonai Rauru. Unlike the Princess of the Skies, Rauru isn't a god or even god adjacent. However, the Zonai were first seen as gods by the people of Hyrule when they descended to the land from the skies long ago. What's really important is how the royal family's power of light is no longer a god-given power, but instead more of a bloodline power, something that stands out when you look at the most important part of Breath of the Wild story, Zelda's struggle to unlock her power of light. Before Breath of the Wild, members of the royal family just had their powers so long as they knew about their lineage. Take Tetra, the princess from Wind Waker. Tetra has spent her whole life on a pirate ship with no knowledge of her true bloodline. When she meets the last king of Hyrule before it was flooded by the Golden Girls, she's revealed to be a member of the royal family. After this revelation, the hero goes off to continue his journey while Tetra is left to hide in a sealed room by herself. When the hero returns, it's discovered that she's been kidnapped! Oh noes! The hero gives chase to Ganon's tower, where he discovers a chest containing light arrows, a weapon typically associated with the royal family's power of light, with 3 of their 6 appearances being the result of a princess. Of the Outliers, 2 have stories that don't allow the princess to be the source, while the 3rd is Wind Waker. So where did the light arrows come from? If we follow Occam's razor, where the simplest solution is the most likely, the answer is that Tetra made them while she was having her little under the sea party for one. She just didn't have a bow to use them. When the King of Evil kidnapped her, he also took the arrows and hid them away in his tower. After all, the Hero of Time used light arrows against him, where they were very effective. More proof that she made them comes from the final battle, where Tetra swipes the hero's bow, explicitly stating she's only taking the bow, and begins firing light arrows with an endless supply. So basically, the King of Hyrule went, hey, use Zelda, and bam! Tetra had the looks, the power, the boring personality, everything she needed to be a pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda. All of this is just opposite to Zelda in Breath of the Wild, who begins training to unlock her powers shortly after her mother dies when she's just 6 years old. Numerous things in Breath of the Wild reveal how hard she trains, including a time when the champion Urbosa had to drag her out of the freezing cold water of one of the springs when she was 7, and another where she passed out while training. Yet despite her effort, she never unlocks them in time. The difference between Tetra and Zelda is night and day. Tetra's powers are a god-given power just as legend claims, yet Zelda's behave more like a bloodline power, something she has the capacity for but which she must unlock first. Without proper training, she can't tap into it. That is, unless an extreme situation allows it to manifest. Guess how her powers finally did unlock? It's the day of the Calamity. King Rome and the champions have all been slain, while Calamity Ganon has taken control of both the Guardians and the Divine Beasts. Link is trying to lead Zelda somewhere safe, but due to constant fighting against Guardians, he's taken many injuries and they're finally catching up. He can barely stand. Zelda pleads for him to run away, knowing his survival is the key to stopping the Calamity, but Link refuses. A new Guardian notices them and rushes over, standing on top of the remains of 2 more Guardians that Link had just struck down. As it rises above the 2, it locks onto Link and begins charging. All Zelda can do is rush to stand in the way, crying out a desperate but defiant. And it works. At long last, her powers of light unlocked as she fell to her death after Link got served on a plate by Ganondorf, and I just switched to Tears of the Kingdom. Making a direct parallel to how her power of light unlocked, Zelda's power of time, which sends her back to the founding of Hyrule, also unlocks in a desperate moment. Then when she meets Rauru and the first queen of Hyrule, Sonia, it's the latter who confirms that Zelda has both of their respective powers and that there's a blood connection between the 3 of them through Zelda. All of this is to highlight how these 2 powers aren't that different from one another. The only real difference is that Zelda needed Sonia to teach her how to use her time powers first, while her light powers didn't require this. This comes down to 2 reasons. First, Zelda's training to unlock her light powers likely imparted enough knowledge to use them. Second, her Zonai blood is likely far stronger than her Hylian blood. I can prove the latter using our silent, superhuman protagonist, Link. We've already established that Link is a descendant of the ancient hero and thus has Zonai blood in his family line, so let's focus more on his feats in a roughly chronological order. According to Mipha's diary, Link is able to best adults in swordplay when he's 4 years old. Thanks to creating a champion, we know Link was only 12 or 13 years old when he drew the Master Sword. Then there's Purah's diary, which states that Link was the youngest knight to have ever been appointed to the Imperial Guard. Lastly, there's Daruk's training journal, which highlights Link's supernatural abilities. First, Daruk writes that Link claims to experience time slowing down when he focuses. This is in reference to the Flurry Rush mechanic, where Link can perform a super fast flurry of attacks after dodging an enemy attack at the right time. Daruk also writes how Link is able to shield parry a Guardian laser, another thing players can do in Breath of the Wild. When a Guardian malfunctions during testing and begins firing everywhere, Link grabs a pot lid off the ground and uses it to parry the laser back, shutting the Guardian down. The amount of speed and power needed to do this is absurd. So absurd, in fact, that this is the incident that finally catches the attention of King Rome and causes the king to assign Link as Zelda's appointed knight. Wielder of the Master Sword? Not a big deal, small fry. Youngest knight in the Imperial Guard? Come back when you're older. Using a pot lid to parry a Guardian laser? You did it, son! This also extends to his family. Link's father was also a knight, one we can assume was high-ranking given how Link went to Zora's domain and met Mipha when he was only 4 years old, while Mipha is royalty. In the Zelda world, higher ranking also implies higher skill level. Now with 2 highly skilled knights and their lineage with the ancient hero, we can make the assumption that Link's family has a history of producing high-caliber knights. And what would allow those talents to shine through even as the family became more and more Hylian? The Zonai bloodline. So that's it. We've made a pattern with Zelda and even went beyond by mixing Link in, proving that the timeline known to players is actually just one of legends. The reason Breath of the Wild can't cleanly connect to that timeline is because it's part of the actual history rather than being just a legend. That said, I have a question for Zelda fans. Do you think that this is enough evidence, or does it feel like something is missing? If you're like me, you're thinking the latter. The big man hasn't been brought into this yet. So let's not waste time and talk about the primary antagonist of the entire Zelda franchise, the Demon King, Ganondorf. Ganondorf is an interesting figure. He's actually the reason I made this hypothesis, with my biggest pieces of evidence being connected to him. But before I drop those bombshells, I want to retread the ideas we've crossed so far from the sole context of the Demon King. First, we need to identify an aspect of our subject. Ganondorf and his alter ego, Ganon, are a singular character throughout most, if not all, of the timeline. This detail is often forgotten about by fans due to a concept introduced in Skyward Sword, the cycle of reincarnation. While I've spoken a few times about Skyward Sword, I've not talked directly about its story, which is a crucial part to understand this concept. Many years before Skyward Sword, but after the godly trio left, all the races lived on the surface alongside the goddess Hylia. But the Demon King Demise, a demonic humanoid who lived deep within the earth and is described as an eternal being that had conquered time itself, wanted the Triforce to make the world his own. He gathered an army of monsters and launched an attack on the surface. Hylia sent one race, the Hylians, up into the sky on a large piece of land along with the Triforce, while she rallied the other races together to battle Demise. While the goddess would win, the victory would only see Demise sealed away, while Hylia was gravely injured. Knowing Demise would eventually break free, she enacted her plan to be reincarnated as a mortal. While Demise is defeated at the end of Skyward Sword, during his dying gasp, he places a curse on both the now mortal Hylia and the hero who had bested him. His hatred would be reborn eternally, while those who share the blood of the goddess or possess the spirit of the hero would forever be bound to fight his reborn hatred, creating the cycle of reincarnation. It's ultimately Ganondorf who inherits Demise's hatred, thus why he and his alter ego, Ganon, keep returning. But the timeline doesn't depict Ganondorf as reincarnating every time, as only his appearance in Four Swords Adventures is said to be a reincarnation. In the Hyrule Historia timeline, all other appearances say he's resurrected. In the updated timeline found in 2017's Hyrule Encyclopedia, resurrected is replaced with one of two other terms depending on the game. For A Link to the Past and Wind Waker, it's now said that he's revived, while in Twilight Princess and the original Legend of Zelda, it simply says he returns. It should also be noted that these terms are also used by two other major villains in the franchise, Vaati and Malladus. Vaati is said to be revived during Four Swords and to return in Four Swords Adventures, while Malladus is said to revive in his single appearance on the timeline in the game Spirit Tracks. So what do these terms mean? According to Merriam-Webster, one definition of revival is a restoration of force. In all uses of the term revive, the villain it relates to was previously sealed away but breaks free of their containment when the seal weakens and their own strength is enough to free them. This method of freedom seems pretty accurate to that definition. As for returns, there are so many different meanings that it's better to just look at how it's used. In Twilight Princess, Ganondorf is banished to the Twilight Realm but escapes when someone else opens a pathway between the Twilight Realm and Hyrule, while in The Legend of Zelda, it's never known how he returns. He just comes back. As for Vaati's one use of the term in Four Swords Adventures, he's set free when the hero of that era draws the Four Sword and removes the seal on the Wind Mage. So return seems to mean either someone removes the seal or barrier that kept them in place, or that the method of their return is something besides reincarnation or revival. Since nearly every appearance of Ganondorf and Ganon is not a reincarnation, this means that every time we encounter him, we're fighting the same person we met in Ocarina of Time. Thanks to this, we can identify two rules about Ganondorf. The first is that when he transforms into the bipedal pig form of Ganon, he remains in that form. We can confirm this by looking at the Downfall timeline where he only appears as Ganon. This form is also highlighted by the title of Demon King. The second rule is that if he's slain as Ganondorf, then he never comes back as Ganondorf. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that due to Four Swords Adventures, but hear me out. While the primary villain of that game is someone named Ganondorf, he's only seen as a billowing cloud of darkness until the very end when he immediately assumes the form of Demon King Ganon. Meanwhile, the Hyrule Encyclopedia timeline explicitly states Ganondorf is reincarnated as Demon King Ganon. In other words, this new Ganondorf doesn't become a reincarnation of the original until he becomes the bipedal pig. So in two timelines, Ganondorf is gone and replaced by Demon King Ganon, while in the one remaining timeline, he's simply killed and never appears again. After the Gerudo King's death in Wind Waker, Malladus shows up to take his spot. This means that if the timelines then merge, only Demon King Ganon would appear, but it's Ganondorf who appears in Tears of the Kingdom and not some bipedal pig. This violation of the rules means a merged timeline simply doesn't work. However, if the timeline is nothing more than legend, we can throw these rules out the window because these rules are created by and thus only apply to the legend timeline and not the historical timeline. Speaking of legends, Ganondorf has the biggest impact on the legend timeline out of every character once we look at his entire story. Earlier I gave a very basic version of the backstory for Tears of the Kingdom, but now we need to flesh out a few details. First, the person who Ganondorf kills is Queen Sonia, while the relic he claims is her secret stone. Secret stones are powerful Zonai artifacts that enhance a person's abilities. It's the secret stone that transforms him into the Demon King. Rauru is then forced to sacrifice himself to seal Ganondorf away deep underground. After this is when Calamity Ganon, the villain of Breath of the Wild, begins to appear. While Calamity Ganon is described in Breath of the Wild as a primal evil that has endured over the ages, it's actually just a manifestation of Ganondorf that gets through the seal. We can prove this thanks to Malice, a poisonous substance that's found all over Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. First, Malice is just a weaker version of another poisonous substance known as Gloom, something that Ganondorf can create and control when he becomes the Demon King. Both substances are capable of draining a person's vitality, but while malice is capable of doing so at a faster rate, it also requires far larger concentrations to do so. It's also very easy to recover lost vitality, as it's more akin to an injury than any sort of permanent loss. By contrast, gloom only needs a thin layer to be able to siphon one's vitality and requires special conditions to recover. At its strongest, it can even permanently remove one's vitality, something we see happen to Link in the opening of Tears of the Kingdom. There's also the Eyes of Malice, large eyes that can appear in Bogs of Malice. These eyes look identical to Ganondorf's eyes in his mummified state. Lastly is the fact that Ganondorf knows what the throne room of Hyrule Castle looks like and can make a perfect illusion of it, despite having never set foot in this specific castle. This would only be possible if he could see through Calamity Ganon. With that, we can talk about the legend timeline. First, Calamity Ganon's recurring appearances are responsible for the idea of Demon King Ganon from throughout the Downfall timeline. It's also the likely inspiration for Malladus, who appears as a boar-like creature with horns and red fur similar to Calamity Ganon's second form, Dark Beast Ganon. Second, Ganondorf himself ends up being the primary inspiration for the original big bad, Demise. Demise looks very similar to Ganondorf's transformed state in Tears of the Kingdom. Both are tall, beefy humanoids with long, fiery red hair, red eyes that turn yellow in the middle, and have claw-like nails on their fingers and toes. Both of them have black, scaly-looking skin and wear a wrapping of cloth around their waist that opens in the front. When Ganondorf rips the secret stone from the crown on his forehead, intending to swallow it so he can be transformed further and defeat Link, a dark substance gushes out like blood from an open wound. This is also the same spot where Demise had a scar on his forehead, left over from a ceiling spike that had been driven into him by Hylia. Then there are their stories, which are virtually identical. In the Legend timeline, both want the Triforce as a means to control the world. Demise was described as living underground and breached through the earth to begin his attack on the surface, while Ganondorf was sealed deep underground where he'll launch his attack from in Tears of the Kingdom. Calamity Ganon's description as a primal evil that has endured over the ages is also the basis for Demise being described as an eternal being that had conquered time itself. Both even have the title of Demon King. The only parts of Demise not related to Ganondorf are his name and his rivalry with Hylia, while the only villain in the Legend timeline without known possible ties to Ganondorf is Vaati. This brings me to my most damning evidence, the things that jumpstarted my hypothesis and are far more than just patterns. Throughout this video, I've ignored one crucial question. Did Nintendo intend all of this, or are these patterns just by chance? If intended, there should exist something that highlights this, and I found that something in the most unlikely of things, the legendary gear. Breath of the Wild has a variety of weapons and armor pieces that directly reference past titles in either their names or descriptions. Referred to as legendary gear by fans, these items are locked behind amiibo, small figures containing NFC technology that can be scanned by Nintendo consoles or DLC. Items from amiibo cannot be considered canon since amiibo are something that exists outside of the universe of Zelda. Not all of the DLC is canon either. Just look at the Nintendo Switch shirt, a DLC item that you can get in Breath of the Wild for Link to wear. The only DLC we can say for certain is canon is the Champion's Ballad, a story DLC that expands on both the champions and the Sheikah monks who foresaw the future and built the shrines to aid Link. But when making Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo put nearly all of these legendary items in the base game without the need for amiibo or DLC, only skipping items not related to Zelda. However, of the 8 legendary weapons and the 12 legendary armor sets, 2 weapons and 1 armor set had both their names and descriptions changed to remove specific references made in those items with one thing in common between them all: Ganondorf. So get your weapons ready as we look at the first item in our lineup, the Dusk Claymore. Located in the Typhlo ruins, the Dusk Claymore was once called the Sword of the Six Sages, first appearing in Twilight Princess, where a group of 6 ancient sages used it to execute Ganondorf. Yet Ganondorf survived the attack, and a Triforce mark appeared on the back of his hand, indicating he was chosen by the goddesses. The failed execution led the ancient sages to throw Ganondorf into the Twilight Realm along with a sword, which Ganondorf kept and ultimately used in his fight with the hero of Twilight. Breath of the Wild describes it like this. The 6 sages are said to have forged this longsword to seal a demon king in the world where the hero fought against the beasts of Twilight. The blade shines with a holy luster. With one sentence, we have 3 different references: the 6 sages, the demon king, and the beasts of Twilight. The first 2 are pretty obvious at this point, while the third refers to creatures from the Twilight Realm that look like beasts. Now, let's look at how the Dusk Claymore is described. A slender claymore thought to have been handed down to the kingdom of Hyrule ages ago. The blade shines with a holy luster. Every reference has been removed, even mention of the hero, as if disconnecting itself from the story of Twilight Princess. Yet despite these changes, the sword retains a connection to a group of sages. To find the weapon, Link needs to solve various puzzles using the powers of the 4 sages he helps to awaken. Upon completion, a secret area opens up containing a chest with the Dusk Claymore and a monument that reads like this: a monument to loyalty. Hyrule owes its peace to the gift that King Rauru gave unto us in his noble feat of imprisoning the Demon King. The great battle began with support from the sages, each of whom bore a shining secret stone. Among these were 4 Hyruleans, loyal warriors all, who hastened to King Rauru's aid as their oaths demanded. They are the pride of the peoples of Hyrule. This stone monument is dedicated to the loyalty that will echo through time. The monument is in tribute to the 6 sages that fought alongside King Rauru during the imprisoning war, 4 of whom were the ancestors of the sages that Link needed to awaken in order to even find this place. Admittedly, it could be that the changes were to avoid confusing players who lack experience with Twilight Princess, though there are issues with that idea. For now, we'll play nice, primarily because this logic doesn't work with the second weapon, the Dusk Bow. This bow, originally known as the Twilight Bow, also appeared in Twilight Princess. Here, the Princess of Twilight uses it when she teams up with the hero in a horseback battle against Ganondorf. So how does Breath of the Wild describe it? A bow used by the princess who fought the beasts of Twilight alongside the hero. It's said to contain the spirits of light's power. It fires arrows straight and true as if beams of light. Like the Dusk Claymore, the bow has several references. What's most important is the indirect reference to Ganondorf by mention of the battle where the princess and hero fought together. This was the only fight they teamed up for in that game. So how did it turn out in Tears of the Kingdom? A bow that has been in the royal family for ages, said to have been used by a princess who fought beasts of Twilight. It forcefully fires long-range arrows. While the Dusk Bow retains its reference to the beasts of Twilight, everything else is different. For starters, it refers to its past user as a princess rather than the princess, implying it wasn't used by a member of the royal family of Hyrule. This makes sense given that the Twilight Bow fires light arrows while the Dusk Bow doesn't, something it should be able to do if it was used by the royal family. More importantly, it removes mention of the battle where the princess and hero fought together. As an indirect reference to Ganondorf, this isn't a necessary change as new players aren't going to be confused by this, yet they did it anyway. It's also not the idea of removing mentions of people fighting alongside the hero. Another legendary item from Twilight Princess, Midna's helmet, retains this idea. For the curious, here's how that reads in Tears of the Kingdom. A helmet much like one Midna wore when she fought alongside the hero of Twilight. It's a rather rare find. This brings me to the changed armor, the Evil Spirit set. Originally called the Phantom Ganon set, this armor shares the appearance of Phantom Ganon from Ocarina of Time, who is a doppelganger and minion of Ganondorf. Phantom Ganon does appear in Tears of the Kingdom, retaining its role as Ganondorf's minion and matching his appearance. Because of this, the confusion logic could still be valid, but only for the name. When described in Breath of the Wild, each piece of this set references Ganondorf by stating that the armor is inspirited by a dark entity resembling the great king of evil himself. While that title has likely been in your head for a while, Tears of the Kingdom never calls Ganondorf as the king of evil. The reason it's in your head is because I was calling him the king of evil throughout most of this video. I'm sure you can guess that Tears of the Kingdom removed mention of the great king of evil. Here's how the body armor is described. Some believe this armor is inspirited by a malevolent entity. It's a rather rare find. This description is nearly identical for the greaves and mask, changing only a few words early on based on the type of item. Like the Dusk Bow, this change isn't necessary as the confusion logic doesn't apply. Yet what's really interesting about this armor isn't the description or name, but the appearance of the mask. The mask is not based on the original appearance of Ocarina of Time's Phantom Ganon on the Nintendo 64, but rather on the 3DS remake. Earlier, I brought up something strange during the basic story beats of Tears of the Kingdom, Ganondorf's ears. Ganondorf starts Ocarina of Time with round ears, but after the 7-year time skip, when he's obtained a piece of the Triforce, he suddenly has pointed ears like Hylian's. This was changed in the 3DS remake, so he always kept round ears. Now let's take a closer look at the mask. Notice those horns on the side? They look a lot like pointed ears. In addition, there's how the mask fits on Link. Right below these horns are pointed ears in black. While these could be Link's ears, they don't match the size of his. In addition, some headpieces completely hide Link's ears, like the Yiga clan mask. This could have been done here, but it wasn't. If this mask is meant to look like Phantom Ganon, and Phantom Ganon looks like Ganondorf, why does it use aesthetics that match pointed ears over round ones? This leads to another round of Occam's razor. The Evil Spirit set has nothing to do with Phantom Ganon or Ganondorf. Now, I hear the rebuttal from fans. What about all the other legendary items? They're also canon. They all mention other stories. This is true, but there are two facets to this. First, nearly every legendary item uses phrases like according to legend or said to, including the ones I brought up. Remember, Nintendo has said it's impossible to tell which legends are historical fact and which are mere fairy tales. Only 2 legendary items, the Bigoron sword and the Sword of the Hero, don't use this sort of wording. The second is that if Tears of the Kingdom is on one timeline that isn't a merged timeline, then every referenced story needs to happen on that one timeline. The problem is we have references to all the timelines. The only ways to solve this is either all of these stories happened on this one timeline in an order we don't know anymore, or that some of them never happened. Both of these ideas upend everything we know about the timeline. So we have a lot of evidence and we have clear intent. If this were a court case, I'd feel pretty safe about winning at this point. After all, the hypothesis itself negates counter-arguments. Bringing up any specific argument from any specific game prior to Breath of the Wild can just be thrown out with, that's just legend, it can be wrong. It's like the idea of a dream theory, where any argument can be thrown out because it was just a dream. Yet, as an old school Zelda fan, I hate this idea. To counter anything with "that's just legend" feels disingenuous. If there's to be a reason why counter arguments can't be thrown against my hypothesis, it should be because it answers questions no other idea can. While everything I've talked about so far makes sense, it's not as if these things can't be explained in other ways, even if some of them, like merged timeline, are questionable. This is just what makes the most logical sense. When I first developed this hypothesis, I couldn't come up with something that only this idea could answer. Yet while I was watching numerous videos about Zelda lore, trying to see if anyone else thought of this idea, something hit me. A problem no other idea could properly solve, but which this one can. To do that, we need to return to the timeline and discuss its most hated part, the existence of the downfall timeline. When I described the 3 branches of the timeline earlier, I noted how the downfall timeline was a surprise to fans. When revealed, many players hated the idea and still do. The idea of a branch forming from a hero being slain isn't a clean-cut timeline branch like the adult and child timelines, but instead is more akin to multiverse theory. In that situation, any game could suddenly see a branching path form based on the idea of its hero dying. For all my talk of how Nintendo cares about the timeline, throwing this in feels like the opposite and is part of why fans think Nintendo doesn't care about it. Yet not only have they not made other branches, there's something else I didn't mention. Since 2003, Nintendo has claimed that there's an internal document that outlines how the games relate to each other, seen by only a few people. A master document, if you will. This means that the downfall timeline was planned and that there's a reason that other games don't create their own timelines from a hero failing. So I went hunting for an answer, and I think what I came up with will shock fans. The answer is the second Hyrule Warriors game, Age of Calamity. I mentioned Hyrule Warriors before and how Nintendo said it's not canon, but this only applies to the very first one. When Nintendo revealed Age of Calamity, they pushed it as a prequel story to Breath of the Wild, showing the events leading up to the rise of the Calamity. Instead, what we got was a what-if story about the Kingdom of Hyrule not falling and instead beating Calamity Ganon. It also was inconsistent with the lore of Breath of the Wild, such as how Link obtains the Master Sword during the events of Age of Calamity when he's 17 years old rather than 12 or 13 as Creating a Champion stated, so fans brushed it off as non-canon. However, I think Tears of the Kingdom's lore drastically changes how we need to view this game, and by the end I think you will too. Just follow me for a moment. 100 years ago, Calamity Ganon brings down the Kingdom of Hyrule. A near-death Link is put in the Shrine of Resurrection to be healed, and Zelda, now awakened to her power of light, goes to hold off Ganon. Link eventually returns, defeats the Calamity, and saves Zelda. A few years later, Ganondorf is freed from his imprisonment, leading to Zelda traveling back in time. Yet also 100 years ago, in the moment when Zelda's powers awaken, a small guardian named Teriko that Zelda built before her mother's passing suddenly reactivates and hears Zelda's plea to save everyone. It somehow throws itself back in time where it's able to change events, resulting in the Calamity being defeated. This forms a new timeline where Link and Zelda live on in their normal lives. Meanwhile, Ganondorf won't break out of his seal for at least 100 years and possibly longer, meaning that Link and Zelda would never deal with him as they would be old and frail by then. The biggest change, however, is that Zelda no longer picks up Raru's secret stone. Without it, she never travels to the past and never meets Raru and Sonia. Now this timeline changes not from the moment when Teriko appeared, but instead from the era of King Raru, a change that ripples through time. This is why Age of Calamity doesn't match the lore of Breath of the Wild. A butterfly effect has changed things further than it seems, resulting in things like Link never going to the Lost Woods at an early age. Now we have two timelines where Ganondorf is sealed and Calamity Ganon exists. But Ganondorf being sealed was a result of him killing Queen Sonia and claiming her secret stone, something he was only able to do because of the time-traveling Zelda. Not only is it her image he uses to lure Sonia out, but Zelda's desire to help makes her confident that she and Sonia can expose Ganondorf. As a result, Sonia takes the risk of being away from Raru, a move that seals her death. Without Zelda, Sonia would never die at Ganondorf's hands, while Ganondorf wouldn't get her secret stone. But he needs to get one in order to be sealed away and maintain the timeline. Since a time traveler was responsible the first time, that means another time traveler has to show up in this other timeline. A single timeline with a closed loop is a bootstrap paradox, but now we have two different timelines that both have this paradox. This means that there must be a timeline where no time travelers appear, which would result in Ganondorf failing to get a secret stone and instead being caught and executed. So that's two timelines where Ganondorf is sealed and one where he's executed. All three of these timelines split from the same era, an era that just so happens to be where Ocarina of Time sits in the Legend timeline and where it splits into three. So how do those branches look? Two where Ganondorf is sealed away but the hero is slain in one of them, and one where things play out differently and Ganondorf is executed. The only difference between these two versions is that it's not the hero who is killed but Queen Sonia. With that, we can definitively say where Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom go, on the Downfall timeline where Queen Sonia is killed. It's her death that starts the Downfall timeline, not the Hero of Time's death. And that is why Zelda is in the Age of Veracity.